Hello, and welcome to Learn Linux Now. I'm your host, Edward. This is session number 5, in which I briefly discuss on installing applications on your Linux distro or desktop environment of choice. Now, when it comes to installing and using applications, for the most part, you're going to be doing it through the software center that's included with your distribution and or desktop environment, and they differ in each one of those. So if you're by now, hopefully you've installed a distribution and a particular desktop with a particular desktop environment for your desktop, and in so doing, you are going to have different choices. For example, if you installed Ubuntu, you're going to be using the software center, their particular software center. Now, Ubuntu, I think I've mentioned this before in previous sessions, but they have their own customized version of GNOME desktop environment, and the same can be said for their software center. If you were to install a vanilla distribution with vanilla GNOME desktop environment, you will see the similarities between the Ubuntu Software Center and the GNOME Software Center. And the same can be said for if you were to install, say, the KDE desktop environment, as I have listed there. You're going to be presented with what's called Discover as their software center. And then also, of course, with Pop! OS, I've mentioned there's another popular distribution. They have what's called Pop Shop, and it's been a while since I've actually looked at the similarities, but I believe they might be a little bit similar to the GNOME Software Center, and I'm going to bring up examples of that. So if I were to bring up the my Fedora virtual machine with KDE installed, I already have it opened, and you will see that as soon as you open up Discover, you are automatically presented with some software that you can install, or just suggested software, if you will. But if you needed to install, say, an Office Suite alternative that you would normally get in Microsoft, you can actually go into the subcategories and under Office and install a particular Office application. Now, for the most part, as far as alternatives, most Linux distributions are going to include Libre Office, and it seems to be the popular alternative these days. I prefer only Office, and I encourage you to check that out. So I have used Libre Office in the past, and I have found that only Office seems to be a lot more compatible with the Microsoft file formats of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. So I would check out only Office, and some of the software centers out there should already have only Office as available in their repo. And that's one thing I do want to note too, that most of these software centers have their own particular what's called software repositories. So that's Discover on the KDE environment. And I also want to point out too that most software centers, that if you need to install an operating system update or security updates, they're going to be included inside the software center also. And this is, again, Discover with KDE. Now, if I were to pull up my Ubuntu virtual machine, and I already, as I said, I already have Software Center already pulled up, and it'll actually say Ubuntu Software Center. And again, like I said, if you pull up a vanilla GNOME desktop environment, you will see the similarities between a GNOME Software Center and Ubuntu Software Center. But if I pull this up again, you have some software here that is recommended for to install, and I don't know if this was, I don't use there's the categories there at the bottom, but I was going to say, yeah, I didn't know if it had categories or not, but it does, and it has. So if you wanted to, install a photo editing tool like in GIMP, which is a pretty good substitute for Photoshop, you can go in here and install. is taking a moment to pull up because of the resources on this virtual machine and my virtual host. But you will be presented with software. There we go. It took a moment to install under that particular category. And as I said before, as far as OS updates, you can choose updates, OS updates, and security updates to install from within the Software Center. Now, those are the GUI versions of installing, or GUI means, I should say, of installing softwares. Now, the other options are from command line. And if you wanted to use command line, and most of the time, like say for instance, if you're going to install a server that's headless, that doesn't come with a desktop environment, you're going to use the command line most of the time to install, actually all the time, to install software. And the means of actually installing those is, well, with your Red Hat based distributions, you're going to use Yum and or DNF. DNF is actually being replaced, is replacing Yum. Matter of fact, if you look at the soft link for the Yum command, it actually links to DNF. So, I mean, pretty much these days, I just select DNF and don't do Yum. But so Yum, you're going to do you're going to install software that way. So basically, the command would be like Yum install only Office. And now for your Debian base, it's going to be apt install VLC, and then of course your Arch listed there. There's your commands there. I've used Pacman. I haven't used UART in the past. I have used Pacman, but you would use Pacman to install software. And then at the bottom of that my list are some of the alternative ways of installing software, and actually the most popular and very convenient ways of installing software these days is through Flatpak and Snap. Snap is Ubuntu. It's pretty much their initiative, and they have, matter of fact, if you install any kind of software using Snap, it's going to come from their repository. But you can install software in Fedora using Snap. But I actually use Flatpak mostly for installing software, and it has its own repository in the FlatHub. You can actually even go to FlatHub website and look at all the software that's available to install via Flatpak. And matter of fact, I have seen specifically in the GNOME desktop environment within Fedora that you can choose. I think you have to enable third-party repositories, but I think you can choose in the Software Center, the GNOME Software Center, either installing an RPM from a drop-down. If you look in the upper-hand corner of the GNOME Software Center, you can choose RPM, or you can choose Flatpak. Of course, that is if you enable Flatpak to install software. So, from like I said, from a command line, you type in Flatpak install VLC. And another alternative for installing software is from command. Well, actually, I believe you can do it from command line, but it's mostly from within your file explorer. Is app image. There's going to be some scenarios, not that often. It's rare, but you'll want to install in software. You'll go to the software distribution website, and they have an app image available to install. All you have to do is click to download that file. You'll have to look at the properties and make sure it's executable first before you proceed with installing. But you would download it to your computer, look in the File Explorer, File Manager, make sure it's executable, double click it, and then it'll install and launch the application for you. It's very convenient. It's not, again, it's not, there aren't a lot of software. There's not a lot of software out there that uses app image, but it actually is a very convenient way of installing applications and running applications. But again, as we go through these sessions, I will delve more into some of the more advanced uses of Linux, and I hope you'll stay tuned for those sessions. If you have any questions or comments, of course you can comment on this video in YouTube, or even go to my website and comment there and ask your question or make comments. I encourage you to subscribe and participate in any feedback that you may have. But for now, I ask you to take care of yourself and be kind.